Hello, Dragonstar. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we dive into the specific strategy, could you tell us a little bit about your experience as a player?
Uh, hey guys, I've been playing this game for last 4 years, and I just pretty much play all the settings possible: 1v1, team games, deathmatch, Empire Wars. And managed to reach around 2K2 level at this game right now. Working to get better at it even more. So that's my experience so far. Hopefully, I can improve a little bit more going forward.
That's awesome. So, the map we're going to talk today is Socotra. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown about what to expect, the way the map looks, and the typical strategies that come from that?
So the map Socotra is a little bit of a unique one compared to the traditional maps. There's a lot less space to work with, and you're in like really closed quarters with your enemy. The most important thing on the map is you have to think of the space as a resource as well. So you have food, wood, gold, and stone, but there should be like a fifth bracket named space on that particular map because you have very limited space to work with. You'll see a lot of aggression in certain all-inish type of plays where you have to basically adapt on the spot. There is no set build orders, but there's like a couple of openings which might really help you. The typical strategies that you will see from that is like heavy aggression in Dark Age, Feudal Age, and Castle Age throughout. And like some scenarios where both of the players have managed to somewhat stall the game, it might turn into a faster Imperial battle as well. So there's a variety of strategies, but all of them revolve around controlling the space on the map and playing according to each of the strengths of the civilizations.
So, you mentioned obviously that space is a really big deal. Are there any other parts of the map that players need to pay a lot of attention to?
Uh, the other parts, like you, of course, have to look out for laming. The first almost 10 to 15 minutes, you are going to fight with a lot of villagers. You're going to deal with like players running to your economy, sniping your zebras, taking your elephant. You only start with one, so you have to be really careful when you take it. Make sure you don't scout with the sheep because the opponents will be sending their villages and the scouts forward to wall in your resources. There's a limited amount of stone near your base as well, so there's two tiles of two tile stones. So if you have those stones walled up, you will get crushed pretty heavily, and you will not have enough stone to counter tower. But it will also depend on what sort of opening you go for as well. So those are like couple of things you can look out for in the early game. And middle game and Castle Age is all just adaptations on top of what happened in the Dark Age.
Okay, so given that it is so aggressive and space is such a big factor and there's so much laming, what kind of civilizations would you recommend? And are there any civilizations that would favor lower level players that are safer or easier to play?
I don't think you should distinguish between levels. I think like it's mostly just about strategy and the execution of it where the level starts differentiating. So for the civilization, this goes for every single level of player out there. My personal favorites are like Mongol because you have hunt, Aztecs because you have the military, Berbers because you can run away with villages and start fighting will wars and stuff. Teuton, Spanish, a lot of all lineage civilizations which have like one thing that they're really good at doing. So I will tend to like look towards those civilizations which have really strong one town center aggressive plays.
That makes a lot of sense. So, since those tend to be the most common picks, are there any counters or specific strategies that they tend to be weak against?
Uh, you pretty much have to expect it and mirror it in like a slightly better fashion than he is doing. So you can do almost the same strategy, but in a defensive sense, where you have the home field advantage since he's sending villagers and he's sending his militias and scouts in your base. So you have your reinforcements closer to your base compared to him. Since space is that much more important, so having that reinforcement like a little bit quicker in your own base might be something that will help you. But a straight up counter always just revolves around the matchup. So let's assume we're playing something like Spanish versus Aztecs. So Aztecs, you have eagle in the start. Spanish, you have basically the power spike of the conquistador and your faster building villages. So Spanish wants to go for a fast castle. Aztecs wants to make sure that doesn't happen and will try to play to his strength. So both of those openings will look a lot different. Where the Spanish is like looking to fast castle, and the Aztec player is trying his best to make sure that doesn't happen. So both the paths of like the plays will always be differentiated. Maybe Spanish will try to like bluff the Aztec by doing like maybe a feudal rush instead of going for a fast castle, catching the Aztecs off guard. So there's a couple of mind games that you can do based on the civilizations and what they expect you to do. So it's like very much plays into how your opponent is expecting the map to play out.
That makes a lot of sense. So, finally, you mentioned that the map looks a little bit different compared to other standard maps. Are there any ways that that affects build orders, or any build orders that you should keep in mind when playing the map?
Uh, if you're fighting a lot in the Dark Age and going for some like villages forward, you're idling your town centers, your berries are getting walled, your deers are getting sniped. Of course, you won't have enough resources to click up to the next stage. So the most important thing when you pay attention to stuff like that is making sure your TC is working the entire time and you have enough food to produce villages and click up at a reasonable time. There is no set timing that you can put, especially if you're under that much pressure. Like I just go by the feel, but maybe in terms of build order, I can advise players to just add like loom into your build early on, like where you're getting loom relatively early compared to getting it right before clicking up. And that's important because it's better to get loom and not lose villages than to delay loom and get that slight advantage. But in the process of doing that, you might end up losing a villages. So losing villages is like a definite statement of like not being able to cover up for that early aggression part. So including loom in the build order, maybe adding one or two more villages to your typical builds might help you give that like smooth out a little bit of the inconsistencies you might have in the Dark Age. So one or two villages more and getting loom early would be my slight changes in the build orders like you guys typically would want to go for on the map.
So it's less about a specific build order and more just making your TC, or making sure your TC keeps working. That
Yeah,
makes a lot of
exactly.
sense. So,
Yeah,
last but not
since
least, are there any
yeah,
alternative strategies or unique approaches to the map that players should be prepared for?
as I pointed out, there's like a lot of villager fighting. So getting your zooms in, since there's a function, like there's a very specific function in Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which wasn't present in the older iterations of the game, where you can zoom into the screen and shift click the villages in the will fight and pulling away the weaker ones back to your town center. That will be very crucial, especially if like you have seen a couple of Socotra games. Maybe you can find a couple of the Rex or the YouTube games and stuff. I actually was able to take games of Hera, and it came down to 3-2 in that series and I lost it, but it was super close. So yeah, yeah, like in this map, the skill difference just shrinks that much. If I can start beating Hera on that map, I think anyone like has a chance of taking out pretty much anyone on that map. It's like very specific to your execution and what strategy you do. It doesn't have anything to do with like the skill difference. Of course, the skill will play like a small aspect to what you're going to do. But in terms of alternate strategies and unique approaches, as I pointed out, like maybe some sort of uh, like semi boom approach can work where you're walling and only defending with like towers and castles and small booming behind and going to imperial behind it. So those are also the things you can watch out. Like some players like to play it really passive. uh, it honestly depends on the approach and the civilization that you're going to be facing. I can't give like a general sense of strategies that you have to look out for. Towers are very like annoying. It like basically restricts your space of moving out, farming, uh, not letting you expand your base and stuff. So towers, castle drops, monk rushes, fast imps, villager wars. Those are like typically the things you're gonna see on the map.
Thank you so much, man. That was a lot of really fantastic info.
Yeah, hopefully it helps.